Tonight we're doing the East-West Schism, and we're going to look at Pope Gregory VII, Anselm, and Pope Urban II will be kind of the tail end of there. Pope Urban II is most notable, in case we don't get there tonight, for actually being the one to call for the First Crusade. So that gives you an idea of what timeline we're talking about. The East-West Schism, the official date is going to be in 1054. So again, we're right past the thousands. And you will start to see some Church of Christ theology pop up in this one with Anselm of Canterbury. So, as always, every single time, we are not covering everything. We are not even covering everything about the year 1054 because there's so much going on in and around this time period. The next time period that we will get to, we're going to do Thomas Aquinas, and that'll kind of end our Middle Ages and kind of really carry us through the Renaissance into the Reformation. So we're going to start taking some bigger chunks again. And then the second rule number 2 is whatever we do cover is contested. So scholars with perfect facts and perfect knowledge about the events of what went down have different interpretations and in many cases good reasons for different interpretations. And so they can be both right and wrong at the same time. It's super fun because we're humans. But to give you all some context on what we've been going over the past couple of weeks, a few weeks ago we had Pope Gregory the Great, who was in many ways the last member of the last leader of the Western Church that was not Catholic. This is his successor, Pope Sabinian, and you'll notice that I've got the Church's Catholic Church. So we're 400 years removed from this point in our timeline. So the Catholic Church is very much a thing, and it is made its way to be different from both the Eastern Orthodox Church and in many ways what came before it. Now, Pope Gregory the Great is the man on your right, and he is catching the vision of Augustine, which is the man on your left, for the idea of what comes next after the Roman Empire. And Pope Gregory the Great is in many ways trying to hold on to what makes someone a Western Christian or what makes someone a Roman, and he's trying to hold on to and make something out of the collapse of the Roman Empire. And so his strategy was to plant monasteries all throughout Western Europe so that Christianity would slowly seep into the ground and suffuse into the air. And so by the time we get to 1000, people know the stories. They know David and Goliath. They know the parables of Jesus. They have them memorized. And so that is kind of like what the job of the monasteries was supposed to do. And in many ways, the plan worked. He bred Christianity into Europe. Charles Taylor, a Catholic philosopher, talks about how Pope Gregory the Great created what he refers to as a sacred canopy, or a bunch of trees that you can kind of see the light of God, and it looks incredibly beautiful. And we're all sitting under it together, having a single shared narrative. Now, is there a single shared narrative in Western Europe at this time? No, but it feels that way when we look back and we read the writing, when we look back and we think about how people live their lives. Answers and biblical logic come into play in both the secular and the sacred realms. And so, in many ways, Pope Gregory the Great succeeded. Today, we're kicking off with a namesake of his, Pope Gregory VII. Pope Gregory VII chose the name Gregory because he was trying to emulate Gregory the Great. And he will be the first to kind of reform the idea or the vision that Augustine was catching. So as you can see here, the bridge is a little bit different. It's a wooden, I was going for a truss bridge, but it's kind of a middle truss arch bridge kind of thing going on there. And he's catching the vision of Augustine. I want you to notice how the pillars at the bottom if you look at the pillars at the bottom between Augustine and Gregory the Great, they're very similar. You got Greek, Roman, philosophy, logic, empire, conquest. Those are very similar. If you look over here at Gregory the Seventh, that pillar has kind of changed a bit. It's dropped Greek. So that the Greek will be the Eastern Empire, the Eastern Orthodox Church. So it's kind of dropped the Greek roots out of Christianity at this point. He's also going to focus on law and economy, and that's really going to come out of his Roman heritage that he's going to be reaching back on. Instead of empire, he's going to be working on nations, literal nations like France, Germany, Spain, the nations of Western Europe that we have today. And so we're going to start to see those form more or less in his lifetime, which is from roughly 1033 to about 1080. So Pope Gregory the Great was not just a good pope, good at being pope. He actually cultivated a set of popes in what is called the papal curia to institute what became known as the Gregorian reforms. And those Gregorian forms are mostly set out to answer the question down there at the bottom of his pillar, authority. Who's in charge? So the Gregorian reforms, there's four major things that they're doing. So lay people are creating and appointing bishops and priests. So think judges. In those days, people did what they wanted, or when Micah becomes a priest in the book of Judges. 2, laymen are controlling church property. 3, the sin of simony, which is kind of like treating something holy as if it were a secular commodity that can be exchanged for money or goods. So like a marriage contract or communion or these things. So a duke could pay a local bishop to say, don't serve the other duke communion. Simony, not a great look. And the fourth issue that Pope Gregory took a lot of issue with is married clergy. So the mythos, at least for me growing up, of Catholicism is clergy were celibate from like the 300s. That's actually not going to be the clergy won't be celibate in the Catholic Church until the late 1200s fully, despite these reforms. So that would actually be a larger portion of church history than the 800 years that are going to, or 700 years that are going to follow it. So clergy were married until for sure the Gregorian reforms, and really more or less until the Fourth Lateran Council, that's in the 1200s. But all of these questions are being challenged because Gregory has encountered nation states now. So these are secular kings that are trying to get into the church to control the populace. And Gregory is pushing back against that, saying, no, the church is its own authority, and he's trying to set up the church as an authority over the nation states. And so it's all of this question of who's in charge, and the Catholic Church hasn't had to answer this question for 400 years because there was no empires. There was no long-lasting nation to really challenge the church in any sort of authority. They just more or less did whatever they wanted because at the end of the day, they had the food and the money to support the peasants, to support the knights. And so Gregory, in his reforms, will be challenging authority. Now, as we talked about last week, and as this map shows, as they converted nation states to Christians, those Christians, the barbarians that we talked about last week, began to travel to the Holy Land to figure out what Christianity was all about. Let's go check out our roots. It's a very normal thing when you've got extra money and it's actually safe to make the trip. What that does is put those, the common people, rather than the archbishops or the ambassadors, in touch with other common people. And it starts to create friction. And if you have a group of cardinals and a pope who are really interested in authority, guess what they're going to try and do? They're going to try and exert their authority over the rest of the world, especially since they have their people traveling down to Jerusalem. And that's going to create more or less the East-West Schism. So, before we get too far into the East-West Schism, let's talk about the Eastern Church, because we haven't talked about them at all. And there are other churches that are still in existence today that claim traditions from neither the Catholic nor the Eastern Orthodox Church. But I thought it might be interesting for us to at least get an idea of the Eastern Church, because it's a fairly foreign concept, I think, to most of us. And in many cases, we kind of forget that it exists. So the Eastern Church is based out of Constantinople, which is, for those who can't see, right here at the tip of Turkey. And this is the Pentarchy See. So these are the 5 major bishops who kind of get together and make rulings and do whatever they wanted. This map is from, I think it's 565. And so you can see how the Roman church, or the Roman bishop, has the largest land area. Then there's the light blue or teal is the bishop, or who will be called the Patriarch of Constantinople. The darker blue will be Antioch. The orange down at the bottom will be Alexandria, and the purple right there in the middle is Jerusalem. So 3 of these churches claim to be founded by Peter. That's Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria. Alexandria has the loosest claim to that because they were actually founded by Mark the Evangelist, who is supposedly Peter's chief disciple. Which leaves the Constantinople church being founded much later, which makes sense because Constantinople wasn't a city until the 300s, really. And so they've always kind of got a chip on their shoulder about how legitimate or long-standing they are in this kind of 5-person council here. And that's going to persist from the time the city is founded until today, for the most part. One of the reasons why Constantine's mother goes relic hunting so much in Jerusalem and around the Holy Land and brings all those relics back to the Hagia Sophia is to help establish a deeper connection for the Constantinople Church to the Holy Land. So she's like, I've got all the relics here. They're all here, and it's a gorgeous and beautiful church. I wish we could go back and look at the frescoes. They were whitewashed in the 1400s, so we don't get to enjoy that. But Constantinople has this kind of chip on its shoulder that as far as ecclesiastically or spiritually, it is lesser than the other 4 churches. And from the time of Constantinople's founding, the Bishop of Rome has more or less operated in a space of a first among equals. This becomes especially true under Pope Gregory. So Gregory is going to be the one who really pushes the papacy above the other bishops. In a way, it makes sense because it also happens that 3 of these, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria, will be conquered and held by the Muslims until the Crusades. So they can't be the top churches because they're held by non-Christian kings or rulers. But if you get to Pope Gregory the Seventh in 1000, and what he really cares about is authority and who's in charge, and the Pope has always been first among equals, and now there's only 2 people left, well, you're just first among the other guy. And so he's going to push the envelope as much as he can to try and claim that he is in charge, or the Pope is in charge of the whole church, and the whole church should submit to the Pope's rule. So, Eastern Church. This is Bartholomew I. His title is the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. Let's see here. So here's here's a nice, lovely breakdown of Eastern Orthodox versus the Church of Christ. The main differences are they are still hierarchical, where they have bishops, priests, and deacons. They all funnel back up into the Patriarch, who is based out of now Istanbul. And so they still funnel up in that. They are They have the smells and the bells that we often associate with the Catholic Church. And the other major theological difference is that they affirm the historical creeds. So if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the Nicene Creed and how important that is in forming the early church. In general, the Church of Christ has held to a no creed type of format. The reason why is, part of the reason the East-West Schism happens is the West tries to add on to the Nicene Creed, literally a clause, one clause. And so the reason why the original founders of the Church of Christ movement said no creeds is creeds can cause division. And so the goal was to remove that. So those are kind of the main ones out of here. You can read this. It'll be up online for the video, so you can go peruse this and really get into it. But for the most part, one other one, authority. This one is interesting. So they hold to what is called holy tradition. So that is not just scripture. Scripture is first, but it's also the church councils that come after it and the church fathers that come after them. So when we were talking about Gregory of Nazianzus a few weeks ago, one of the things that came out in the Council of Chalcedon was that his writings were to be considered authoritative. That means that they are not equal with the Bible, but just beneath the Bible. So his writings would be a primary way to help us interpret what's going on in the Bible. So read the Bible for yourself, interpret that. They're not trying to mess with the Bible, but then right underneath it, they have some of the patriarchs' writings to help them interpret it. And so that goes into the tradition of how they view Scripture and how they come to their conclusions. In reality, it's very similar. In actual practice, it's very similar to Catholicism. The major difference is Catholicism will go very Latin and the Eastern Orthodox Church will go Greek. And so if you know how those languages branch and differ, you basically have all of the differences between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. You can follow it right along the linguistic lines, and you're like, oh, this is why this word is weird in Latin, and why this word makes perfect sense in Greek, and you go, oh, this is why the Roman Catholic Church does this weird thing, and the Eastern Roman Church does this weird thing. And it's right along the linguistic lines, more or less. So, that's Church of Christ. We're doing great on time. Woo! So let's talk about the Great Schism. There are a few things that they really got into for the Great Schism. One of them was the Catholic Church, and a more power move. I don't know that it changes the meaning of it so much. They added a phrase into the Nicene Creed. If you want to Wikipedia it and go into the really deep depths of it, it's called the Filioque Clause. That's Filioque. So those Filioque Clause, it basically added the word "and the Son." That's what they added onto it, to one specific part of the Nicene Creed. I'll let you all go deep into that. The other differences were the East used leavened bread versus the West used unleavened bread. In the Eucharist, the East had what are called icons, or they had pictures of the saints or pictures and depictions of Jesus and the scenes from the Bible up so people could see them and potentially pray to them or pray through them. It was part of it. I don't know why that was such a big deal, but it was, because the Catholic Church and the monasteries have all sorts of paintings and stuff of the saints too. That one has always confused me in the 20 years I have read and learned about the Great Schism. I still don't get the iconoclasm debate. The other one was that Charlemagne was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor, and so they were pretty angry. The Eastern Church was pretty angry that someone could even be crowned as such when the keys to the Roman Empire were sent to Constantinople in 476 and they hadn't been given back. So how can someone be the Roman emperor if he's not being claimed by the Senate? Because the Senate keys are in Constantinople. So you can't crown somebody without the authority to crown somebody. Again, authority. And the final one was the Pope's claim to universal jurisdiction and putting the see, which is what I always call a bishopric, or the land area that reports to the Patriarch of Constantinople, should be underneath the Pope permanently and always, as opposed to a first among equals, or a, hey, we both get to disagree here, and if you go your way and I go my way, then it's fine. But if it really ever came to a complete head, I guess you would win, but it never actually really does, I guess, somehow. Anyways, there was a mutual excommunication in 1054. So in 1054, Pope Leo IX sent a delegation led by the rigid and uncompromising Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople. Their goal was to address the ongoing disagreements and demand the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cerularius, to recognize the Pope's authority. So we're claiming that we're in charge of the kingdoms and Constantinople, and this is what we're doing, because if we don't, then the kingdoms are going to take over the church. So it's a little bit of a place of fear, a little bit of a place of like trying to do some good, because you had bishops who had no ecclesiastical training becoming bishops because a king could make him so, and then he could say to the people, do whatever this king tells you to do. So that's not a great situation. But the equally stubborn Patriarch Cerularius refused to submit, and so on July 16th, 1054, Cardinal Humbert marched into the great cathedral of the Hagia Sophia and placed a bull of excommunication on the main altar, formally excommunicating Cerularius. In response, Cerularius convened a council of bishops and excommunicated Cardinal Humbert and the papal delegation. So you're going to excommunicate us? Fine, we'll excommunicate you right back. Here's a friendly chart to tell you kind of what this schism was about. But at the end of the day, it was about authority, because the papacy at the time was terrified about the church being overtaken by nation states. They were unequipped to live in and under kings. They did not have any sort of systems of separation between the powers. And this will really become a problem for the next 1600 years, or next 600 years, until the founding of America. The founding of America will be the first true state to go. There's a separation between church and state. And so there's always going to be this intermingling between a Holy Roman Empire and the church, or a Holy French Empire, or a Holy Spanish Empire. And as cardinals from those countries become pope, you will see the balance of power shift over the next 700 years. It was shocking when Pope Leo was picked from America, because there had been kind of this stance in the choosing of popes based off of history to not pick a pope from the current most powerful nation in the world. So I don't know how, I wasn't a part of any of those talks. Maybe we'll get to learn about those in a few hundred years. I won't be here. Y'all maybe will be here if you want to be. I don't know. AI is a weird thing. But that was the most shocking part of the current pope getting picked, was because he was American, and America is the most powerful nation on earth right now. And so that was a bit of a break of tradition. There's nowhere that says he couldn't, but it was a little bit of a shock for that particular reason, because of roots 1,000 years ago in 1054, when they were desperately worried about what it meant to have a pope from a particular nation or particular place or particular duchy, even, to give preference and money and aid and things like that to that particular province. No one really typifies the East-West Schism as far as the theology goes better than Anselm of Canterbury. Anselm of Canterbury lived from 1033 to 1109, so that's right throughout this whole period that we're talking about here. He became the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1093. And Anselm is most famous for his work Curs Deus Homo, which means Why did God become man? So that's a really interesting question for someone to be answering at that time from England. So if you're writing this in the late, he publishes in 1094, so just after he becomes archbishop, I believe. And so if this is your question, we have to go, what else is going on around you at the time for this to even be the question? And the best answer that I've heard, highly contested because history is contested, is that Muslim and Jewish scholars had begun to, rather than infiltrate Western Europe as a conquering force, but just as traitors. And so why did God become man is a key question to ask if you are a Muslim or a Jew and you're challenging the Christian position of how is Jesus God? So that's kind of the startup behind this question, is Anselm's trying to figure out how to do that. This is a picture of a manuscript from, I think it's 1254, so not even 200 years after he wrote this. This is one of the oldest books we know that is like perfect. We don't have, like, there's no like question about the language or the words used here or there. So it is a copy of the original Cours Deus Homo, so which is pretty cool. It's kind of the first book in history that we actually have that we know is more or less perfect. The next document that will come out of England that is more or less perfect will be the Magna Carta in 1215. So both of those are actually near the same time, and so that's just neat. Fun fact. So Anselm is answering what is called the skeptic's view. So why would an all-powerful God stoop to human weakness? Why such a difficult plan when he could just use his will? How does suffering prove love if other ways were possible? And is it not unbecoming for God to suffer so? So these are all like pretty good questions, actually, when you think about it from a theological perspective of like, why would God become Jesus so that he could die? Isn't that kind of weird? Like, why not just be like, poof, sin is gone, or do something different? Like, why would God ever need to become man? Anselm is going to be one of the first people in Christian history to actually answer this question. Again, it's because he's actually probably encountered Muslim ideas not on a battlefield at this point. So he's going to have kind of 5 main arguments. It's going to be necessity, unpayable debt, why forgiveness isn't simple, the God-man solution, and a gift of infinite value. What this document, which is only about 100 pages, will set up is what we call today substitutionary atonement theory, or satisfaction theory. So if you have heard the idea that Jesus died to pay your debt of sins, that is this guy right here. First time, more or less, in history. Which is new in 1054. Most of us have the idea that substitutionary atonement theory was around all the time, and it was, but it was a very minority opinion. Prior to that, Jesus did not die for your sins as a payment or as a payment for a unforgivable debt. He died for what is called the Christus Victor. So let's look at the two of those. So Christus Victor is on your left, and satisfaction theory, which is what Anselm put out in Cours Deus Homo, is on your right. So in the Christus Victor, the metaphor is slavery. So we are all enslaved to sin. So therefore enslaved to death. And sin is a corrupting force of our humanity. So we cannot be fully human if we have sinned. The goal out of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and one of the reasons why this is a beautiful kind of separation between the two, is in many ways the Eastern Orthodox Church kind of reaches us to go through the process of theosis, or becoming God-like. Not gods as in like Zeus and Hera and Apollo and stuff like that, but God-like. And that's not a terrible take because we talk about being Christ-like all the time, but they mean it in a different way. But that gets you close to the idea. And so if sin is a corrupting force, we can't become Christ-like or God-like in the Eastern Orthodox Church without Jesus's liberating victory over sin, death, and the grave. So the emphasis is on restoration and healing, and this was by far and away the predominant view of the early church. So for the first 1,000 years, Christus Victor was the way that most Christians, if you asked them what atonement was, if they even understood what that word meant, they would have said something like Christus Victor. You would have gotten some sort of, perfect. No, because people are people and we are forgetful and all the things. But you would have seen something like Christus Victor. After Anselm, the Catholic Church is really going to hold on to satisfaction theory or substitutionary atonement theory. The Reformers, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Ulrich Zwingli, they loved satisfaction theory. They're going to double down on satisfaction theory. It's going to change into something called penal substitutionary atonement theory, which you may have heard it called that way. The simpler way to say it is satisfaction theory. So in Anselm's version, it is more legalistic. There's a courtroom kind of metaphor. And the problem is order is disrupted. So if God is the judge in a courtroom and the order is disruptive, in a courtroom, when the judge is disruptive, what does he do? He bangs his gavel, yells order in the court, and if not, and if you don't act right, he arrests you and sends you to jail. So, in that case, sin is a crime or a transgression. The metaphor is pretty plain and straightforward. We get this because this is, in many ways, our heritage. So, what is Christ doing? Rather than liberating, he is paying off an infinite debt for crimes and transgressions. So the emphasis becomes debt and law and order. So if you think order, this is a big part of, this becomes a really big part of Catholicism. The Eastern Orthodox Church tended to hold a more mysterious and looser view on Christianity in general. The Roman Catholic Church is going to tighten it down, more or less setting the way for the Puritans in 600 years. This is all going to kind of start right here in the 1000s, in the 100 years. So the roots of satisfaction theory definitely go deeper than Anselm, but they aren't really written down or fleshed out until him. And he is going to do it in Cursus Deus Homo. What is interesting about this book as well is there are no necessarily specific verse call outs to it. So there's no footnotes to Bible. It doesn't mean he doesn't use the Bible, but his main mode of doing this will actually be logic, so that you wouldn't have to pick up a Bible to argue satisfaction theory, or you wouldn't have to assert that the Bible was Holy Scripture. You could go take this theory and argue, have a conversation with your Muslim or Jewish trading partner and say, see, this is why Jesus is that. So it was an attempt to hold water across the three Abrahamic faiths. Whether it succeeded or not, that remains to be seen, I guess, in this class. Any questions before I go on? We have a few minutes, actually. About anything so far? Nothing. Wow, I'm doing great at... So, this is a weird theory to get really popular out of the backwater of England. Now, is he Archbishop of Canterbury? Is that kind of a big place? Yes. What satisfaction theory will do is enable the Crusades. There are several different accounts of Urban II, which is him right here, and he's preaching, we need to go on the Crusades at Claremont Cathedral, and to the local bishops and laity. And by the end of his speech, he'll say, all who die by the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. This I grant them through the power of God with which I am invested. So, because he is the vicar of Christ, he is going to give remission of sins. The Crusades, the way they recruited is you could pay off not just your sins, but the sins of your loved ones if you went and fought in the Crusades. So this idea of debt, of unpayable debt, and everything that's going on in satisfaction theory lights up the world because they need a way to recruit people to travel thousands of miles away and probably never come back in battle and to go fight the Muslims in the Holy Land. And so satisfaction theory is more or less the theory that the Pope is going to seize on and grow and do all sorts of things to make it so that you can satisfy or atone for not just you, but maybe your family or a loved uncle or somebody like that who may have sinned and thus incurred an unpayable debt from God, and now you can atone by satisfying with your own death in the same way that Christ died. And so it's kind of a weird theory to actually light the world on fire until you realize that it was published the year before the Crusades were called. And then you go, oh, this lit the world on fire because the Pope was like, I have theological backing to send people to war. And satisfaction theory will continue to be used for the next 700 years-ish, plus maybe, I don't know, it depends on how you read into things, to justify war over and over again. So I think it started out with a really good idea and really noble attempt, and somebody who is genuinely trying to minister to his people. If you read the opening lines of Cursus Deus Homo, which you can get on PDF, I think, for free through Internet Archive, he's like, hopefully someone will come along behind me and do a better job with this. The better job they did with this led to more death and destruction, unfortunately, for Anselm, because I think he tried to do it from a faithful perspective. So that gets us to Pope Urban II. Pope Urban II, not even 50 years after the Great Schism, will get called upon by the Patriarch of Constantinople, because Constantinople will be almost under siege from Muslim forces, and that he will go, all right, we need the Christian armies to come, and Pope Urban II, using Anselm, will urge normal Christians to go fight in the First Crusade. And that sets us up for next week. One of the interesting things about the Crusades that I think gets overlooked often is how many other battles and wars were going on throughout Europe over this time period. So in 1066, that's when William of Normandy fights the Battle of Hastings. The Norman French Duke will take over England. And England will fight wars with France for hundreds of years. And those are going to go on while the Crusades are going on. So you have men fighting in wars for both nation and God, and it is a really bloody time period that we're about to walk into. And it does not get better for a while. The Renaissance in many ways is a little bit better because it kind of starts after the Crusades end, but even then, religion will be used to fight wars in earnest from the start of the Crusades on. So that was the first bell. So we got 5 minutes left. Questions? Go ahead.
So, like you see today, Orthodox churches like Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, are those all the Eastern churches?
They are branches of, or the Greek Orthodox is literally the Eastern Orthodox Church. We just know it in America as the Greek Orthodox Church. If you were in Istanbul, it would be the Orthodox Church, or the Eastern Orthodox Church, if they're feeling like they really need to push away from the Western Church.
So they have their own hierarchy still today?
Yes. So I showed you Bartholomew the First way back here. There he is, Bartholomew the First. He is their version of the Pope. He is the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople. They tend to run things less top down. He does not have the full, like, I can do and say whatever I want because I am from God. He has to convene a council to do things. The council may be small, but he has to have at least other people before he can make some sweeping judgment or something like that. There's the idea of like a papal bull or an encyclical or something like that, like you may have heard from the Catholic Church. That's not really a thing in the Eastern Orthodox Church. They would be like, we convened a council and the council decided this thing should happen. So it's not just a one-off, I am the heir of Christ and infallible and untouchable.
It's still like, just like the Catholic Church, like, do they have like so many branches to where you like a church, a Catholic church in Knoxville has to listen to a diocese, and
so it is still hierarchical, where you would have like a priest who will report to a bishop, who will report to an archbishop, and all the archbishops get together and they pick the patriarch, or they are the ones who do the councils. They're much smaller in number. I think, well, I'm not going to say what number they are because I don't remember exactly, but they are much smaller in number than the like billion Catholics that there are. So by a numbers game, the Catholics definitely won.
One thing that we've noticed is in their artwork. If you're in a Catholic church, you see a lot of pictures of Peter, and then if you go into an Orthodox church, there are a lot of pictures of Paul. It's interesting.
So that is to emphasize their early church fathers, because remember, they came out of Constantinople that wasn't founded by Peter, so they don't want to be overemphasizing Peter like Rome does, because they definitely want to be emphasizing Peter because he's the one with the keys to the kingdom. And so it's a little bit of that. They also have a pretty interesting view on how the resurrection happened. So if you go to an Eastern Orthodox church and you see a picture of the resurrection in a Catholic church or somewhere around here, what do you see? Let's start there.
Oh, you see the tomb.
You see a tomb, okay. And who's there? Peter, Mary, maybe. It depends on which version. If you're looking at John's version, you'll have Mary Magdalene there, and then Peter and John maybe looking in the tomb, and then they're running away, and then Christ appears to Mary all by herself. And so you see something along those lines, but it's always Jesus leaving the tomb more or less by himself. In the Eastern churches, they tend to show it as Jesus is not leaving by himself, but he's pulling Adam and Eve out with him to signify that his work is for all mankind. That is a more universalist approach, and it can be taken that way. It can also not be taken that way, so theologians can figure that one out. That's above my pay grade for a history class. But typically, you will see Jesus not alone, but with Adam and Eve coming out of the tomb or out of the grave, which tends again to line up more with Pauline theology rather than Petrine or Peter theology. Other questions?
How or why did the Crusades end?
Well, the Fourth Crusade failed miserably. We'll get to this next week. The Fourth Crusade failed miserably, and the Western Christians sacked Constantinople instead of fighting the Muslims. So that's why they failed. So that's why the Crusades stopped, more or less. That's the quick answer is that. So they didn't attack the Muslims, they attacked Constantinople and toted off all of those relics back to places like Notre Dame. and St. Peter's Basilica. And so if you go see the holy relics in those places, a lot of times they are from the Fourth Crusade, when Crusaders did very nasty things in Constantinople. So that's a good question. But yes, more or less that's the reason why they stopped, is because it became more about Christians fighting Christians rather than Christians fighting Muslims or Jews, which there was a minor Jewish one. So, but we're not going to talk about that next week because it's too small to talk about. And we have 4 Crusades to get through next week, plus a Reconquista, which is just fun to say. All right, I think that was the second bell. So y'all can go. Thank you all for coming next week. We will do the Crusades next week. It is a bloody period of Christian history that we are kicking off next week. So thank you all for coming.